The First World War had shown the world what war had become. After 4 years of conflict, Europe emerged shattered by the Treaty of Versailles. But soon the general feeling was that what had just been signed was not a peace, but a truce. In 1917, before entering the war, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson had declared, "I promise you this will be the war to end all wars." Ironic. By the 1930s, the European system was unrecognizable from the one presented in France in 1919. In Italy, the democratic government had already been crushed by the fascist regime led by Benito Mussolini for 10 years. In Germany, the National Socialist Party, Nazis for short, saw Adolf Hitler as the only solution. A new German Reich had formed in Europe, the third one. From the ashes of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union was born, undergoing massive transformations under Joseph Stalin. The third wave of fascism was spreading across the old continent. Spain was the true victim of the tension building in those years. A civil war broke out between Francisco Franco's nationalists and the elected republic. The Spanish Republic became the first battlefield for these rising powers. From 1936 to 1939, Franco's fascist forces, supported by Italy and Germany, clashed with the Republicans, backed primarily by the USSR. The final victory went to the Francoists, adding Spain to the growing list of states aligned with Germany and Italy. But while the Spanish War was still raging, the true protagonist of these years, Adolf Hitler, was drafting a plan of action for the Third Reich. The Führer's agenda was simple. The framework of the Treaty of Versailles had to be dismantled, as it was unjust to Germany. The German people, scattered throughout Europe, had to be reunited under the Reich, and finally the Soviet Union, symbol of subversive communism, had to be annihilated. The desire for conflict was clear, but Hitler did not want open war with the major Western powers. Being a veteran of the First World War, he was well aware of the risks of a two-front war. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Italy decided to complete a project started in the late 1800s. In October 1935, Italian troops began their march toward Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, to complete the conquest of the Horn of Africa. The campaign was a success. By May 1936, the Ethiopian monarch, the Negus, had fled into exile. Mussolini could finally announce that the empire was returning to Rome. But the diplomatic price was high. The fascist regime was no longer seen as a moderate mediator between Hitler and the Western powers, but as his direct ally. The League of Nations punished the fascist government with heavy sanctions on the Italian economy. In response, Mussolini would abandon the League's assemblies in December 1937, distancing himself further from the major Western democracies. During those years, the United Kingdom was led by conservative Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, who actually shared some of the Führer's goals, in the sense that he too wanted to avoid a war between major powers at all costs. The British Empire had come out wounded from the First World War. No one was willing to fight again, and Chamberlain interpreted this will through the policy of appeasement. Aware of the injustices of the Versailles Peace, Hitler's demands had to be met quickly to avoid conflict. From the opposition benches, Winston Churchill thundered, convinced that it was impossible to tame a dictator like Hitler. In France, things were not going well either. Although the French were the official guarantors of the Treaty of Versailles, a deep crisis had been inherited from the Great War, and political fractures plagued French society. In the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, there was no will to fight. Sheltered behind the Maginot Line, a defensive system stretching along the Franco-German border, the French felt safe. Internally divided with a pro-fascist right wing and a fragile socialist and pacifist government under Blum, France passively followed the United Kingdom's decisions. In 1938, a new crisis emerged. After a failed attempt in 1934, Germany carried out the Anschluss, the territorial union with Austria. Italy, having seen the resignation of Chancellor Schuschnigg, this time did not send troops to the border as it had done in 1934. The other powers were not interested in Austria's fate. When the new head of government, Seyss-Inquart, leader of the Austrian Nazis, requested German intervention to save Austria from chaos, no one opposed. It was March 11, 1938. The following day, Reich troops entered Austria and annexed it. A month later, a plebiscite overwhelmingly approved the unification with Germany. But for Hitler, it was not enough. New demands followed. The Sudeten, ethnic Germans living in Czechoslovakia, had to be reunited with the Reich. Chamberlain flew twice to Germany in September 1938 to handle the crisis, all in vain. But just as the situation seemed to spiral out of control, Mussolini offered to host a peace summit. The major European powers, excluding the USSR, met in Munich to discuss the issue and calm the waters. On September 29 to 30, 1938, Chamberlain and the new French Prime Minister Daladier accepted almost all of Hitler's demands. Vast areas of Czechoslovakia would be annexed to Germany. The Czechoslovaks were not even consulted. The Munich agreements concluded with a diplomatic triumph for the three heads of state, Chamberlain, Daladier, and Mussolini, for having saved Europe from a new war. But the sacrifice of Czechoslovakia left a mark. Hitler, in the end, had achieved his goals, and most importantly, had understood that he could get whatever he wanted from the Western powers. Churchill, upon Chamberlain's return to England, remarked, "You were given the choice between dishonor and war. You chose dishonor, and you will have war."